Folks, buy the biggest house you can afford. Let's talk about that and then get into the latest home prices and insights for York Region for week ending January 15th, 2025. Buy the biggest house you can afford. I know you've heard that expression. It's been around since the beginning of time, I think. Let's talk about that because there's many people today that are in trouble because they followed that saying, buy the biggest house you can afford. Actually, I think a lot of them stopped listening after the word house. All they heard was buy the biggest house, and that other part that you can afford, maybe they weren't paying so much attention to the second half of that sentence. But the examples that we've seen being realtors, we've seen people looking in Vaughan, Richmond Hill, and Markham, and let's just say for sake of argument, their budget was $1.2 million. And you can get a decent townhouse or semi in Vaughan, Richmond Hill, or Markham for $1.2 million. And that home will suit those buyers. But as they start looking, maybe on their own, they look outside of town, or maybe one of their colleagues from work or a friend starts talking about Alliston, starts talking about Innisfil, starts talking about Barrie, starts talking about Bradford. And when you look at some of the properties there, all of a sudden, the home they're looking at in Vaughan, for example, for $1.2 million, that again would suit them, they can get the same home out of town in some of these areas I've mentioned for, say, $1 million or $900,000. And it's like, wow, I can get the same home so much cheaper. I don't have to spend the top of what I'm approved for, the top of my budget. I can actually have lower payments. I can actually have a financially better lifestyle in a sense that my expenses are lower. So they consider that option and they start looking out of town, the same home, but spending less. Well, they'll go into that home and all of a sudden they'll see another home, much larger, up to their maximum of 1.2. And guess where the search now starts to focus on? They're back to spending the top of their budget, but they're getting a much larger home. They don't need the larger home. They don't need the extra space, but in their mind, they justify that, well, we were going to buy for 1.2 here. We're going to get a home this size. We go out of town, we can get a home this size now for 1.2 million, and that's what they do. Now, some people need the bigger home. Their whole plan is if they buy in Vaughan, Richmond Hill, or Markham, they'd be compromising on the size that would actually suit their family situation, their size of their family, for example. So going out of town to them means they're going to get the kind of home that they prefer, the size of home. But for others, it's just an affordability issue in a sense, and they'll tend to gravitate to still spending their full budget. So yeah, they're buying the biggest home they can afford, and that's what they do. But down the road, this is when we get the phone calls of them wanting to sell their home. Some of them want to move back into the Vaughan, Richmond Hill, or Markham area, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Once you move out, it's really tough to get back in just because price-wise. But they're seeing prices are a bit lower now in Vaughan, Richmond Hill, and Markham, so they're seeing this as an opportunity to get back in, but they're not realizing their values have also come down. Many of them are also calling us, they're struggling. They bought this larger home, as many people did, and with the exchange and rates and market and economy and jobs and all sorts of different reasons, they're struggling financially. But they bought the bigger home that they could afford, and now they can't. If they would have bought the same home, but for less out of town, maybe they'd be in a better situation right now. So there's all sorts of reasons why people buy out of town. For some, They make their new community home, and everything works out great. I can't tell you how many times people moved out for the right reasons, and the one reason bringing them back is they're lonely. So many people that have moved out have said, family and friends don't visit us. We're always in Vaughan, Richmond Hill, or Markham, or we're always in the city here visiting with our family and friends. No one comes out to visit us over there. So we want to come back in. There's all sorts of things that happen down the road. I guess the moral of the story here is maybe we should rethink buy the biggest home you can afford, because even if you can afford it, like all these people that bought this bigger home, I've sold properties where it's just a couple or a couple and one child, and they're in a 3,000, 4,000 square foot home, and they regret it after. That's why they've called me to sell it. They never regret it when they did it. They were like, wow, look at this big home we can buy. Just because you could doesn't mean you should. And the whole attitude of buy the biggest home you can afford, the way the markets have changed and the things that people are experiencing these days financially, maybe it's not the best advice anymore. It's something we got to think long and hard about. If you think this video can help somebody you know, please pass it along. If you get value from what we're talking about, subscribe. If you want to speak with me about your real estate situation, selling, buying, it's really simple. There's a link below this video in the description. It's a link to my calendar. Click on that, book a time that's convenient for you, and we'll talk about whatever's on your mind. Now, let's get into the numbers. Here we go, folks. York Region real estate numbers. We are going to be focused on detached properties only for Vaughan, Richmond Hill, and Markham for week ending January the 15th. Here's a summary and how one area compares to the other for 3 months. But let's get started with Vaughan, again, for detached properties. What we normally would expect at this time of year, and we see it in most cases, in most areas, sales basically on a weekly basis, getting a little bit higher, increasing as we start headed, we're out of the holiday season into January, February, March. We do expect sales to be increasing, and we expect average sold prices to start to creep up a little bit, just because there's also more property selling in the higher price points that adds to the average sold prices. We're not necessarily seeing that in Vaughan though, so I'm explaining all that to show you something different right now. Vaughan, week ending January 6th for January 15th for detached properties. 6 detached properties sold, not a lot. One of them was at $2 million or more. The previous week, we sold 8. Now, we look back. Vaughan, yeah, we see it bouncing up and down. Overall, sales were increasing, but not necessarily on a weekly basis. Average sold price came down. It's $1,485,000. Now, when you're looking at 1,485 and you kind of look back a whole year, 1,485 is, next to the average sold price where only 2 were sold over the Christmas break. Well, 1,485 is the lowest average sold price we've seen. Don't put too much value on where average sold prices are right now during only the second full week of the new year. But compared to last year, since we're going through the numbers, 1,485 is 18% lower than the same week last year. The median price is 21% lower. Median price is 1,403. 6 were sold. A third of those sold, so 2 sold at list price or more. Listings did increase. We went from 38 detached properties listed to 51 that were listed. Active listings is increasing also. Months of inventory way up there at 10.7 months of inventory. Now, before the holiday season, we were hovering, say, between 3 and 4 months of inventory. I would imagine over the next few weeks that we should be coming back down, but right now it's really high. Here's Richmond Hill. 7 detached properties sold, same as the previous week. 2 of those were at $2 million or more. Average sold price, $2,009,000. $2,009,000 is 8% higher than where we were this time a year ago. The median price of $1,550,000 is 8% lower. 7 were sold, 14%. Just a few sold at list price or more, not many. Listings did increase. Active listings is increasing. Months of inventory way up there at 8.4 months of inventory. Markham. Oh, finally, sales are increasing. 16 detached properties were sold in Markham. Sales went from 5 to 12 to 16. 2 of those were at $2 million or more. Average sold price is $1,620,000. 1,620 is 6% lower year over year. The median price of 1,561 is 1% higher. 16 were sold, 44%. So 7 sold at list price or more. Listings, a little bit higher than the previous week. Active listings, not by much, but it is trending upwards. Months of inventory did come down to 3.1 months of inventory. Here's a quick summary of months of inventory. The way the numbers look now, the way months of inventory looks, yeah, kind of seems for Vaughan and Richmond Hill more of a buyer's market, and there will be pockets of that. But I think the predominant kind of feel, even when it comes to Markham, the predominant feel is going to be it's a little bit more of a balanced market, but in some areas you're going to definitely experience the buyer's market out there. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.